Hot squall Tanoyup. Yuan Hothan Squallowin, Chin Quinman Tomi. It's so good to be here. Good day, everybody, and welcome. Swelton Queen Kushamen. Wilson Williams is my English name. Swelton's my ancestral name. I'm an elected councillor and one of two appointed spokespersons for the Squamish Nation. And I'm coming to you today for a very exciting announcement that will position our nation in control of our lands, but also walking with our people in regards to how we control our lands and how we utilize them, how we've done since time immemorial. And we're on this journey, but we're doing it together. The infrastructure, the capacity, the needs our nation require to do this work moving forward. And I'm proud to say we are getting there. We are getting there to a place of comfort, but a place of control, place that we are in the driver's seat, or we are in front of the canoe, paddling, creating a future that will benefit our peoples for the next 7 generations. With that, I would like to turn it over to Kasalem to share a few words, and I'll be your moderator this morning. He will share a few words on this great announcement. Yuan Ha, Osiam.
Tanoyup ans Queto, net to ans Kasalem, ans Squamish, Chinwat it's up not to Squamish Ochomilch, Chin Quinman. Hello, everybody. My name is Kasalem. I'm the elected chairperson for the Squamish Nation Council, and I'm excited to be here today to announce a really important announcement on behalf of the Squamish Nation. Today is a landmark day for the nation as we announce our plans to continue to take full control over our nation's assets and to embark on a capital and community planning process. Today, Squamish Nation is announcing that we will be developing land use strategies for around 350 acres of our lands over the next year. Over the next year, we will be assessing our lands and creating a long-term capital plan, which will be the first for the Squamish Nation. We'll also be considering how to fully unlock the value of our real estate assets, as many people know are very sizable. To support this process, the Squamish Nation Council has passed a moratorium on receiving third-party development proposals on our lands over the next year. This will give space to the Squamish Nation as a government, to our Inchkai Development Corporation, and to our affordable housing provider called Hiam Housing, who will work together with our community to review and assess our lands, as well as create a long-term and long-range capital plan to meet the needs of our Squamish people. This planning exercise and this project will include looking at Squamish Nation reserve lands in West Vancouver, North Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, and in the town of Squamish. These lands are Squamish Nation lands. We hold them in perpetuity. They are gifts from our ancestors that they have handed down to us, and we will never sell our lands. We have fought for decades to see the return of our lands, and we continue to advance the return and the repatriation of our lands back to our community. We are seeking help to develop these lands in a way that meets our needs in terms of social, environmental, economic, and political goals. And economic development of our assets is not just about today, it's about the future. It's about creating a sustainable economic development plan and vision, and really understanding the needs of our community and the economic drivers for how we are going to create it. As many know, a number of years ago, we announced the development at our Sanok lands, which for us was always intended to be the beginning. That more was to come from the Squamish Nation as we look to the future of a number of other land assets that we own, and to really see Sanok as the beginning of a new era for the Squamish Nation. And the announcement today is that we are now going to embark on the planning exercise for the future of other lands. I'm going to hand you over to Mindy White, a CEO for Inchkai Corp.
Thank you, Kasalem. Many of you have been asking, what is next? And to date, we have been relatively reactive, receiving proposals from potential partners and accepting or rejecting them. But that way of planning is over. The moratorium will allow us to engage in a planning exercise to determine how best to unlock the economic value of our assets in a way that reflects Squamish leadership, sovereignty, and values. Today, the Squamish Nation and Enchkai have issued an expression of interest to identify experienced firms who can help us develop a long-range capital plan that is aligned with our social, cultural, environmental, and economic goals. The successful parties will help the nation, Enchkai and Hiem, develop a vision for these lands, one that optimizes the potential financial and social value of the lands. These parties will be selected for their ability to achieve our goals, but they will also be selected for their demonstrated commitment to reconciliation and for their ability to build long-term, trusted relationships with Indigenous communities in a manner that respects our rights and interests. Our members will also see their priority capital projects actualized through much-needed infrastructure planning, including community assets such as healing centers, long-term care homes, assisted living homes, elder centers, member housing, and more. The Nation and Enchkai will not only be looking at housing. Residential, commercial, and industrial uses will all be considered. In addition to the housing shortage, the Lower Mainland also has a pressing shortage of industrial land, which is an impediment to economic growth and to Canada's access to our most important export markets. As with any economic development projects, the rewards will be realized by our neighboring nations in the Lower Mainland. When we can develop our assets in a way that we choose, everyone benefits. Back over to Salem.
This is a long-term project for our community. We will be announcing through various phases the process and also meaningfully engaging and working with our community members, that the Squamish Nation, Enchkai Corp, and the community will be coming together to participate in exploring all of the opportunities. Our plan is a thoughtful, strategic, long-term approach that will ensure that our nation's economic future is secured for generations to come and also for our people living today. This decision and process is in keeping with the Squamish Nation's strategic plan to assert our rightful place as decision makers with influence and control over what happens on our lands, waters, and in the delivery of services to our people. Squamish real estate on the North Shore of Broad Inlet is some of the most important real estate opportunities in the Lower Mainland, if not in the entire country. Just one of these sites, that we call Humulston, at the mouth of the Capilano River, represents an area that is the size of a small municipality. Together, the nation's real estate assets represent an opportunity to reshape the entire region of the North Shore and the Lower Mainland, but also to work with other jurisdictions for the betterment of all our communities under Squamish Nation leadership. The development of these lands will secure the intergenerational wealth for Squamish people, and to do it in a good way that will bring about much needed community development that will benefit all British Columbians. A focus will be on making significant contributions to the major social issues in our Lower Mainland, which is the pressing housing shortage. Developing our land and assets not just for the benefit of our community, but also to benefit our neighbors and our local economy by working on developing much needed housing for our region and doing this in a way that is in keeping with our Squamish values. I'm now going to turn it back to our spokesperson for the Squamish Nation, Wilson Williams, who will be moderating any questions from you today.
Thank you, Salem. Thank you, Mindy. My hands go up to both of you for your leadership and the assets you bring, the skills to move us forward today. Not only for capacity building, but for the passion you have to help move our nation forward. And my hands go up to Mindy and her great team and all the hard work, but also Salem and the leadership for our council on moving us forward in a good way with our people. And with that, I would like to entertain any questions. And I do have my laptop here, so bear with me. I know we have a few media that may want to reach out for some questions. I do have a question from Lori Colbert. So on the 350 acres, can you break down the number of acres per city, North Van, West Van, Squamish, and the Sunshine Coast? And can you say what percentage of development will be residential versus industrial? And also potential start and end dates for these projects. And I'll gear it over to Castellum.
Thank you for that question. So there's a number of lands that we currently own, and they have their own histories where some were historically industrial lands and they sort of remain in that situation. And residential development might not be possible because of some of the constraints of those lands. Other lands are sort of unimproved currently, and they have the potential for all different kinds of uses. So part of the planning exercise will be to explore what is feasible or what is ideal for a number of the different parcels. But in terms of sizes, the vast majority of the 350 acres is on the North Shore. It's in areas along Marine Drive, near Landscape Bridge. Another parcel is near Second Narrows Bridge around the Seymour River, as well as the Linwood Marina and the Seymour River area. And then we have a number of sites in Squamish on our Stopmas community as you enter into the town of Squamish, and on the Sunshine Coast and Gibson's Landing. Approximately 200 to 250 of the acres are mostly based on the North Shore, with the remainder in the Squamish Valley and the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you, Castellum. And thank you, Lori, for your question. And I'm getting excited as we talk here in regards to the potential of unlocking the potential of our lands. But I do have another question. And I have a question from Ben Milger from CTV, who's asking, in terms of addressing the housing shortage, does that mean we can expect some developments to be as dense as Sanok? If so, where could those developments be located? And I'll turn it over to Salem, and then I'll open it up to Mindy if you have anything to add as well. But thank you, Ben. Salem?
This question is an important one because it sort of ties to, I think, the purpose of what's going to take place over the next year. For a number of our lands, we don't currently have, and we haven't done that investment to understand what some of these parcels or some of these areas can actually handle in terms of density, for example. We had a much clearer idea when we started the Sanok development, but some of these lands that have come back to our community that we've protected, we need to go through sort of that site feasibility to explore. But Sanok was and always intended to be the beginning of something, and we saw the power that the Squamish Nation has to do a number of things. One, to be able to move quickly on developing our lands, much faster than most local governments can move, much faster than most development projects can move on a similar type of opportunity. We also understood through that process the power that the Squamish Nation has as the government to be able to control the zoning and the density for our lands and to maximize or realize the full potential. And Sanok is a good example where the conversation that we had as a nation was, what is the highest form of density that we can put on Sanok? And as a result of that, we were able to analyze and understand that around 6,000 units of affordable rental was the ideal amount to create a livable community, to create a sustainable community, but also to generate those long-term profits that are going to come back to the Squamish Nation community to fund our programs and services and our capital needs. So we don't have a sense yet on what the density could look like and where. That's going to be part of the work over the next year. But I can say that Sanok was always intended to be the beginning of the work that we do in this area to generate wealth off our lands, just like the rest of the city has generated significant wealth off our territory over the last 150 years. We want to embark on exploring that for ourselves as well now.
I'll hand it over to Mindy if you have anything to add in regards to the question.
Yes, just to support that, I think this is the beginning of the process that we'll undertake over the next year, and that will help inform and define what densification can look like on these parcels of land. We are keenly aware of the housing shortage and the crisis that's facing the Lower Mainland, and this forms part of the solution. So that it will be addressed as part of the work that we're going to undertake.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Kaselim. And thank you, Ben. We'll go back to another question. Actually, Lori Colbert again from the Vancouver Sun is asking, is there a rough estimate of how many homes could be built on these lands? And I will ask again about the potential start and end dates of these projects, and I'll hand it over to Kaselim.
Yes. So unfortunately, at today's point in time, we don't have an answer necessarily to that question. We're not exactly sure yet on what sort of unit amounts we might be looking at relative to the different parcels. And we also aren't sure on, we haven't determined yet sort of the sequence that we might engage in some of these developments, what areas might come first or second. And a lot of that's going to come through sort of exploring the site feasibility, looking at the broader sort of infrastructure needs that might be have to be built, aligning ourselves with other plans that are happening, like for example, the work that's happening with the province TransLink and the Metro Vancouver Mayor's Council around bringing rapid transit to the North Shore. So a lot of pieces are sort of need to be explored in order for us to figure out both what we are looking at in terms of density and in terms of unit amounts, and also location, staging, and things like that. So our plan is over the next year, we will be able to explore some of those questions, and then probably in a year's time, we'll have a much clearer idea and be able to announce more details as we embark on this.
Thank you, Kaselim. Anything to add, Mindy?
Yes, I'd just like to reiterate, it is a long-range capital plan, and we would be looking at these parcels for phased development. And hopefully after the work that is undertaken this year, we would have more of that information to share more broadly, and hopefully more exciting announcements in the future.
Awesome. Thank you both. We'll go over to Stephen Chua from the Squamish Chief, and I'll stick to the process with Kaselim and then Mindy, who's asking, thanks for taking the questions. You mentioned Squamish and Squamish. Number one, what kind of uses, residential, industrial, etc., are you seeing from that area? And number two, are there any other areas in the Squamish area that would be affected by this work? And what kind of uses would be on those lands? And I'll repeat any of the questions if you need be, Kaselim and Mindy.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. The opportunities in our nation-held assets in Squamish is an area that I would say is a particular focus for Squamish Nation Council and our leadership, that we've spent a lot of time focusing on our developments and economic opportunities in, say, the Lower Mainland. But we also recognize that a big portion of our population of the Squamish people live in the Squamish Valley, that we want to create opportunities that are in close proximity to our community and to be able to bring a lot of community assets to our community in the Squamish Valley as well. So in terms of what is going to be looked at, part of it is looking at Squamish, which has increased in size over the last couple of years. The Squamish Nation was successful in acquiring a parcel of land adjacent to the Squamish Reserve and adding it back to reserve land under the federal addition to reserve process. So we've added now another 40 acres to that reserve. We also have the Site B industrial lands that the nation owns and controls, and the water lots that we have the rights to be able to build out into, which is largely industrial zoned. And although that's not reserve land, we have included that in as a part of the mandate for this planning exercise to really incorporate not just the reserve lands, but assets that the nation owns and can develop into future uses. But it also is going to be looking at the community infrastructure needs, affordable housing, elders housing, community centers, daycares, schools, longhouses, parks, all of those types of things that are going to serve the community, and then what economic drivers do we need to be able to help fund or finance those things. So there's a lot that is going to be explored in Squamish. The other aspect of the mandate that council has set is council has also asked for our staff and our teams to identify a second site in Squamish. It has not been determined which parcel yet. That is going to come back. And so there's going to be, the intention is to do 2 projects or 2 sites in Squamish with Squamish Nation assets. But we still have to identify what that next one might be. There's a few options that are going to be explored. So we don't know yet what the second site will be, but there will be a second site that we are going to explore within the District of Squamish as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Kaselim. Anything to add, Mindy?
Not much. I think that was a pretty comprehensive overview of the Squamish site. And I'd agree that we see mixed use. There's residential, commercial, industrial lands existing. And we will work with our consultants to determine what that mix could look like.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kaselim, for the answer. You answered all 3 questions. And thank you, Mindy, for the comments as well. And we have time for a few more questions. I have one coming in on the docket as we speak. Coming from Douglas Kwan of the Vancouver Sun, who's asking, what lessons did you learn from Sanok that might change your approach to the future development projects and negotiations with municipal governments?
That is a great question. I think when we started this Sanok process, and I want to acknowledge the previous terms of council prior to my election and the election of some of my colleagues in 2017, that the process was already underway. And some of the lessons around the full value of our lands being recognized and affirmed, that the value that we are bringing to the table as a First Nations government, and also the certainty that we bring as a First Nations government with First Nations land, that there is a type of value that we are bringing to the table that no other developer can bring, not just in terms of speed of development and not just in terms of the scale, but also that these are long-term plans. These are assets that we're going to hold in perpetuity. And so when we look at how we can build partnerships, we are in it for the long haul. We're not in it for the short-term gains. And I think that we've learned through the Sanok development how much value we bring as a First Nations government to the development of our lands. And so I think that that's sort of on the partnership side. Our work through service agreements and developing in good faith service agreements with municipalities. I think Sanok became a model. We have a template now that we can build off of, that as we approach other service agreements with other municipalities, we've explored a lot of the conversations that come up through that. And we have now something that, that took us 1.5 to 2 years to complete. We can actually now shave off time because we have a template that we can use as a starting point for our conversations on other service agreements. So there's a lot of lessons there in that sense, and I think that we've been very successful. We really appreciate the sort of good faith approach that we worked on the service agreement with the City of Vancouver. We have very productive, wonderful relationships with other municipalities like the City of North Van, the District of North Van, and the District of West Van, and the District of Squamish, as well as the Township of Gibsons. So we have a lot of successful relationships that we've built based off of mutual respect and reconciliation. And we are excited to be able to go to those municipalities once we understand a bit more of what our vision is, to start entertaining what it might look like to secure service agreements for those lands as well. But I also, welcome comments from Mindy on this, who has been leading as the CEO of our economic development company.
Yes, and we are undertaking a review or a lessons learning process as part of just best corporate practices with this type of relationship. And we are at a stage of NCHI's evolution. I'd say we've got capacity within our real estate team. We have significant experience and skills brought to the table. And part of that will inform our process, our policies, and how we engage going forward. So I think there's lots of great takeaways that we've put together from our process going through this Sanok partnership with Westbank. We have the models, the approach, the key takeaways that we can inform potential partners and proponents in the future.
Thank you, Kaselam. Thank you, Mindy, once again. We'll go to one more question. Another question from Lori Culbert from the Vancouver Sun. And it's related to almost the question we were just on. So I'll just read it out loud. Will municipalities play a role and or have a say in what is built on these lands? Or, like Sanok, will the Squamish Nation have full decision-making control over these lands?
That's an excellent question. It's a very important one. For most of the reserve or Indian Reserve assets that we own, the Squamish Nation government, which is our council and our administration, is the jurisdiction with rights and prerogatives over the decision-making for those lands. But we are not an island unto ourselves. We require partnerships. We require, we have obligations that we must fulfill within that sort of sandbox, but we are the jurisdiction that is in control. So just like at Sanok, where those are our lands, we are the jurisdiction of control. We set control over certain things, but at the same time, we found ways and we chose ways to align ourselves with best practices with the neighboring municipality. Like for example, on the massing of the buildings and the distance between buildings, well, let's align ourselves with city best practices because they're good best practices, but also where there's places to innovate and to be forward-looking, like the sort of low car, high bike sort of development at Sanok. That was an innovation that we brought to the table that we were able to share with the city and work through them on this concept as equals, but ultimately with us in control. So that is still going to be the case for a number of these lands. It's still going to be true that we are the jurisdiction in control. I often explain that just in the same way that Port Moody does not make decisions over zoning in the City of Vancouver, the City of Vancouver does not make decisions on Squamish Nation lands, but we will work together with our neighbors and our partners to be able to identify how we can work together, what needs to happen in order to work together. And I think that the other piece of it too is that a lot of the local government leaders, our neighbors, provincial, federal leaders are all talking about one thing, which is how do we address the housing need in our communities? And this is where the Squamish Nation is going to bring a lot of value to our communities, all our neighboring communities. So we think that there's a lot of work to be done in that partnership, but at the end of the day, the Squamish Nation will largely be in control of a lot of pieces, but at the same time, we'll have to work with others to really bring about the full vision of some of these types of opportunities.
Mindy?
Yes, I just say as Enchkai Development, we operate under the guiding principles and the jurisdiction of the nation. So we adhere to their standards and the requirements under law. So that's no different than if you do development in other municipalities and other reserve lands. So.
Thank you so much. Last question coming from Stephen Chua from the Squamish Chief. When you talk about public work plans, are we also speaking about infrastructure like pipes, water, sewage, roads, etc.? And I'll do the same process, Kaselam.
Yes, we definitely are talking about the infrastructure needs for a number of our lands, both in terms of the development of our lands that will largely benefit Squamish people, in terms of the infrastructure for our community members. A good example of that is that we've been working on a proposal to upgrade our Stotmas community off of septic tanks and actually to tie into the municipal sewage lines, and working with Indigenous Services Canada on funding for a project like that. We're also working through infrastructure to bring potable water to our community at Chikai, which has been on well water and has experienced a lot of water issues, and previously was on a drinking water advisory. So those are just infrastructure needs that we are trying to find ways to fund and to invest in that are just to benefit our own community. But then when we start looking at the economic opportunities, the need to upgrade facilities, infrastructure, whether it's on transportation, whether it's on water, sewage, things like that. But also, in the same vein, exploring the opportunities that those bring about. As we learned at Sanok, we have a district energy system that is largely going to run off of the waste system to generate heat to power the Sanok development, so that we can help achieve the sort of net zero emission goals. So there's a lot of infrastructure that will be needed to be explored, but there's also opportunities within some of that infrastructure as we explore it. So it definitely includes all of those types of things. But it's also, I guess, to speak beyond that too, is that it's also looking at the livability of our communities. How do we build in, culture, transportation, built form, and infrastructure, and bring it all together in a place that is going to be highly livable for our people, but also any of the residents or users, workers, business owners, things like that, that are going to utilize these sites as we explore what can happen on them.
And I'd just like to add that same creative lens through which SNOC was developed with sustainability, net zero operational carbon, and innovation, that same perspective will be brought forward through this master planning land use exercise, in which we'll engage with consultants with expertise in these areas as part of the expression of interest selection process.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Kaselim. That is all our questions. I really like to thank you both for the technical background, but also historical background, but also how we're moving forward and how we're doing it. And it's sharing the background and where we are as Squamish today, sharing that journey we've been on since time immemorial through our lands, and how we're evolving to today, and how we're moving forward in our canoe together for tomorrow. And, there's space in our canoe to make a bigger, better, stronger community here throughout our traditional territories. And I thank you for the media for tuning in today, this morning, for all the great questions, and for everyone listening. Thank you very much. Chin Kwinmintomi, on behalf of the Squamish Nation, our Squamish our Inchikai development team, Osiam. Have a beautiful day. And you're able to reach out further questions. If you weren't able to answer or get your questions across, feel free to reach out to our communications teams, and we'll see you again soon.